So let's talk about type 1 because it's a bit different, but I know you can help it as well. So type 1 diabetes, which often kids get diagnosed with, or adults as well, does that mean they're born with distorted insulin receptors? This is my guess.
No, it's usually an autoimmune disease. So your immune system is attacking the beta cells and destroying them.
Oh, so you're producing less insulin.
You're producing no insulin.
No insulin. You don't produce insulin.
See, the type 2 diabetic still produces insulin, but not enough to keep their sugars in the favorable range. So what we got to do with the type 2 diabetic is we have to make the body not need as much insulin. So the insulin that's being produced is sufficient. But even with more advancement in type 2 diabetes, where it becomes almost type 1.5, where insulin production keeps going down to the point where they actually have to be put on insulin and they're not producing much of their own insulin, even in those cases, the Nutritarian diet, with increasing the nutrient density of cells and the phytochemicals and antioxidants of the cells, it seems to restore the beta cell function, and it enables this hibernating beta cells to be able to reclaim the ability to produce insulin. So the improved nutrition improves both the insulin resistance and the ability of the body to make insulin if needed. So it eventually normalizes the person so they're not diabetic. Because most conventional physicians will say you can't reverse type 2 diabetes, and we're saying absolutely. It not only reverses insulin resistance, but we also see beta cell function start to improve, and then we could measure C-peptide and insulin levels and see them improve. You know what I mean? See, they're getting better. So it's not, with the type 1, it's the hallmark is significant or complete destruction of the beta cells in the pancreas by the immune system attack, usually when you're young on the beta. So the person now is going to require insulin the rest of their life.
Okay, I got it. Why have I heard that your diet helps type 1 diabetics?
Because type 1 diabetes is a death sentence when you eat conventionally. It has a high degree of shortened lifespan, increasing risk of both heart disease and cancer, because the chronic exposure to amounts of excess insulin through life shortens lifespan.
You're saying excess insulin from medication, like from what you inject with.
Right. And when you're taking insulin from medication and eating an American diet, then you're having to use excess insulin to keep your sugars favorable on the American diet.
Right.
So the combination of exogenous insulin, medical insulin injected, with the American diet is a witch's cauldron of dangers. And so people are scared to have, or for their long-term prognosis with type 1 diabetes, and they think that by taking their finger sticks or putting the insulin monitors on, and they're constantly watching their sugar and controlling their insulin, very fine-tuning it to keep it favorable, they think that's going to be the best thing to extend their lifespan, and it doesn't work. Because watching their sugars really closely makes them have to take excess amount of insulin to compensate for the American diet that requires excess amount of insulin. And by covering whatever sugar they're eating with enough insulin, they wind up taking 2 times, 3 times, 4 times as much insulin that would have been needed. So I'm saying that what we see happens with type 1 diabetics is instead of using 50, 60, 70, 80, or 100 units of insulin a day, they wind up only needing 20 units or 15 units a day. Their insulin requirements go way down, and instead of chronically watching and chasing every food they're eating and having their sugars drop when they exercise and go up and down all over the place, which is not good, instead they learn to eat the Nutritarian diet that we eat, that's consistent. So we eat about the same dietary skeleton. We eat about the same amount of calories each day. We eat the same glycemically favorable foods each day. We're not we don't need a huge amount of insulin after each meal. So as a type 1, I can get by with maybe 12 units of insulin at night and 2 with each meal. And 12 at night plus 2 with each meal is 6 plus 12 is 18 units of insulin a day. So I could do that every day, and I can keep my sugars always between like 80 and 120, except for right after the meal. It can go up a little higher for the first hour after the meal. And I can exercise without it going too low because I'm not using too much insulin. And I can, play sports, and I can not have to use worry about insulin or take too much.
Right.
And it's the consistency of using, in this case, 12, 2, 2, and 2. It's the consistency of 18 units of insulin throughout this person's whole life now. it gives them the ability to live a lifespan of 95 to 105 years old, the same as a person who's non-diabetic.
Right.
So
Not a death sentence at all.
It's not a death sentence.
Right.
Because they're eating healthy like we are, and their insulin requirements are relatively low.
Right.
It's the combination between the American diet. So it's when you go to a diabetologist, endocrinologist, a dietitian, then you get advice that's going to kill you, because they're going to fine-tune your insulin to control your sugars no matter what you eat, giving you this broad spectrum of unhealthy foods you can eat, and you could adjust your insulin to any level possible. We're saying, well, if you're eating more than 18 units of insulin a day, you're eating wrong. If you're having to use more than 2 or 3 units of insulin with each meal, it's not a healthy meal. If you're requiring more than so much insulin at night, and a type 1 diabetic can develop extra body fat and be insulin resistant too. So they can have type 1 diabetes requiring more insulin because they're overweight as well. So it's more important for a type 1 diabetic to follow a Nutritarian diet, because even if they don't get rid of their type 1 diabetes, it's still going to be life-saving to them to follow this way of program. And by the way, I did publish a research article where I had some very young type 1 diabetics who were able to reverse their type 1 diabetes or forestall it from getting worse when they switched to this diet style. So we can prevent type 1 diabetes, and maybe if you're very newly diagnosed, even make it go into remission. But the most important thing is preventing it in early life with healthy diets from the parents and healthy diet with kids. And, all these diseases are still the results of bad health and bad nutrition. Somebody just said to me yesterday, they said, how is the Nutritarian diet working here when the person is eating healthfully and they developed a brain cancer, a brain tumor, at 12 years old or something? And I'm saying, well, unfortunately, the diet your parents eat.
Isn't it your grandparents as well?
And maybe some
And exposure to chemicals, toxins,
Yes,
could be
right. It's not all what you eat, because some of these diseases can be called from what your parents eat. We know that the consumption of luncheon meats like pastrami and hot dogs, not just in a woman when she's pregnant, but even 3 years before pregnancy, can increase risk of leukemia or brain tumors in the child.
Right.
So we're saying here, it is what we eat, but of course we may have to go back to what your parents ate and what your grandmother ate too, because what we're destroying the cells and the genes from prior generations by the unhealthy diet. So the unhealthy diet and exposure to chemicals is at the foundation of all these diseases, but it's not all. But sometimes you can get a bad hand dealt to you because of what chemical exposures that happened when you were in the womb, or that your parent or your mother had before you were in the womb. You know what I mean?